Bonjour, namaste, shalom. Our conversation today is with Dr. Gautam Desiraju. Gautamji is a renowned scientist with Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore. Prior to this, he was with the University of Hyderabad for 30 years. He received his PhD from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign in the US. After a lifetime of writing about crystal engineering, a field about which I have no knowledge myself, he has now written a book about his vision for India. His book, India, Bharat 2.0, yeah, that's the book, is our topic of conversation today. Gautamji, welcome and thank you for taking the time to talk to us today.
Thank you so much, Vishalji. It's a pleasure to talk about my book. Yeah.
And Gautamji, as we were just discussing before the official session began, you've done a lot of work in crystal engineering in your career, and now you've written this provocative book about your vision for India. How would you describe it to someone who has not read yet the book in 30 to 40 seconds?
I would describe it as anyone who feels that India has not progressed as well as it should have, given the natural talent that is available in terms of people, natural wealth, entrepreneurship, general presence of mind, and average IQ levels, would like to read my book, because when so many things are good in this country, I felt that the progress in 75 years was not commensurate. So I began to look for systemic reasons as to why this could be the case, and therefore I came to a sort of a dire conclusion that the basic system, the constitution itself, was ill-suited to us.
And that's a very provocative claim you make in the book. What motivated you to start writing it? Any sort of personal reasons that led you to the book?
Well, I have been, I started thinking about my country when I came back from the US in 78, and when I took up my permanent position at University of Hyderabad. So we Indians are naturally interested in politics. So it just seemed to me that the politicians were undergoing too many contortions and too many distortions just to stay in power. And also the feeling that politicians are individuals like the rest of us. I mean, they were almost doing things in a more difficult way than what needed to be done. And so why was all this confusion? And this grew on me during the 1990s, which was a particularly unsettled period in Indian political life with all those coalition governments. By that time, the Congress was well and truly on its decline. I would feel that the 1984 election victory of Rajiv Gandhi was purely a sympathy vote. It was the Congress, I think, was already coming down after 67, basically. And so 1990s were, and it was kind of like watching a circus. And of course, I was very busy with my academic work, so I didn't have time to think more than that. And then I think sadder for me was the UPA years of 2004 to 2014, where one could just see corruption at the highest levels. You know, this greatly saddened me. And the book, as you've read the book, so you know it's not a particularly political in its theme. And as I've said, I don't mention politicians and political parties too much after the emergency. So, but at the same time, I did feel that there was something wrong. It was nagging me all the time. And when COVID came and I had some time to do reading independent of my work, because I'm an experimental scientist, and if you are not able to go to the lab and see your students, then there's not a whole lot you can do. So I started reading and about the Constitution. I said, is the basic thing itself wrong? I mean, because all these amendments, court cases, strange lawyers going to the Supreme Court and getting all sorts of things. Also, the treatment of Hindus, Muslims. It seemed to me that the whole thing was very, very confused. And so then I began to look at the assembly debates. And that's when my eyes were really opened. I think no study of the Constitution is let me see, I think that's my battery is running out. Just a moment, please. Just a moment. Yeah, sorry about that. I really felt at that point of time that it was the system that had played us false. And then nobody, as I was saying, should embark on anything to do with the Constitution without reading the 165 days debate transcripts, which are in public domain and they are official. They are put out by the government of India. So there is no question of any distortion in that, because anything that happened after that is subsequent interpretations by various people. So I went back to the debates. And then when I started reading, then I began to realize that the nature of the Constitution, the way it was written, was fundamentally affected by partition. And this led to two big problems in independent India, namely the relationship between the religious communities, number one, and the second is the federalism, the center-state balance. The third big problem, of course, is the upper caste, lower caste problem, but that didn't have so much to do with partition. But partition was, I believe, a defining moment. And then I started reading more. I knew about nation states and civilizational states, but then the reality that India, a civilizational state, was not portrayed as such in the Constitution. I think that was a huge, huge disappointment for me. And I think this is what actually led me to start writing the book.
So, Gautamji, you and I are both PhDs, and we know that even in the Constituent Assembly, when the Constitution was being drafted, there was many educated people, like, many highly educated people. Why do you think they sort of took this wrong turn on these three issues that you just brought up? I mean, there was no depth of education level in that group, including your famous grandfather, who is the reason why we have Teachers' Day in India, right? So
that's true, Vishalji. I have no doubt. Of course, we all know they were all educated people, all 300 of them. I think they were also all highly nationalistic. There was no doubt about that. There was no hint of any Tukde gang in that Constituent Assembly, none whatsoever. I think I have talked about it in the book. I think one of the main reasons why they went the route they went, about Muslims in particular, is that they were traumatized by partition and they feared that there would be a second partition. And so as a result, they bent over backwards to, if not in the Constitution itself, in some of the amendments that quickly followed. I think they were still quite scared that, because if there had been a second religion-based partition, then I think the country wouldn't have held together.
And I think that's a very original idea that I got from your book, that it was the trauma of partition that continued to influence the drafting of the Constitution. That is a very, I think, original idea. But let's get to other things. In the book, you talk about state-sponsored discrimination against Hindus. I use your words. Could you share your thinking here?
Well, yes, I mean, it started right in the beginning in little things like say the Somnath temple issue when Munshi and Prasad and others were very keen to get the temple built because at least as a symbol of the country beginning to find itself, and how Nehru opposed this bitterly. In fact, he told Prasad not to go and so on. And then, of course, the various amendments, Vishalji. I mean, Article 16 and then 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, and more recently, this notorious right to education bill, which the bill itself is innocuous, but when it was notified, then the fact that the minority institutions would not be subject, private minority institutions would not be subject to the reservations, whereas private Hindu institutions would be. So these are all blatant cases of discrimination, but in more specific ways, the Indian state has made itself the arbiter of what a given Hindu scripture says. Take the Sabrimala judgment, for instance. Why does the Indian state, always align itself with the conservative Muslim dogma, like Shabano, where even after the Supreme Court passed its judgment, the Parliament, set it aside? And I think Nehru's original statement, when he was asked about Uniform Civil Code, when the Hindu bill was being passed in 55 or 56, he says that, I think it was Shyam Prasad Mukherjee or Kripalani who asked him, why do you tolerate Muslim communalism, but you do not tolerate Hindu communalism? And Nehru's reply was that Hindu communalism becomes nationalism. You see, nationalism was a bad word for Nehru. And in fact, I do believe that Nehru had a profound dislike of Hindus. This is now coming out, I think, in so many little things. And the minority protection and the false meaning given to this word secularism, I think the fact that they couldn't pass UCC, Kripalani himself said in way back, he told Nehru, he said, you know that the Muslims will accept UCC and yet you don't want to do it. And government welfare on religious grounds, the setting up of this Ministry for Minority Affairs. I mean, for the first time, a non-Muslim has been appointed as a minister for this ministry. But I question the formation of this very ministry. And 2018, they have something called National Commission for Minority Education and Institutions, NCMEI. And Supreme Court has ruled that NCMEI has life and death powers over what kind of education is carried out in these minority institutions. I mean, so many anomalies. I mean, Christians, Parsis, and Muslims can adjudicate as judges on religious matters concerning their religions, any of their religions. A Parsi can adjudicate on something to do with Islam, and they can also adjudicate on matters pertaining to the Hindu faith. But only Hindus cannot adjudicate on any of the other religions. I think this is something that is wrong, actually. It's wrong. I mean, it is immoral. And but Smriti Irani, who is born a Hindu, technically a Parsi by marriage, has been made a minister here. So that is the first step. And what about the 93rd Amendment of 2006, when the same thing, this Hindu private institutions have to follow reservations? And there have been notifications by the ministries that Urdu language teachers should actively search for them in areas where there are 25% Urdu speaking people. And people have said that in sensitive areas with a lot of Muslim population, please see to it that Muslim police officers are posted there. Well, these are all official orders given by various governments, central governments and state governments. I mean, the church is, I would talk about it as well. All over Tamil Nadu, there are places where the church has 100-year leases on valuable bits of property in urban areas. And in almost all these cases, the 100-year leases have run out. And yet no government is going there and looking at these leases and trying to say that, well, it's all over, you fellows have to leave this place. Minority only schemes in education. And I think at one point someone even said that we should try to count the number of Muslims in the army. The army resisted that actually. So I think especially between okay, what about what Shinde said about saffron terror after the Taj Mahal Hotel massacre in 2008? Only yesterday and today Jaishankar has come out with, they actually tried to make us, if Kasab had not been caught alive, Vishal, we would never have known the truth of that matter. The Congress narrative of Hindu terror would have been allowed to, prevail at that time.
Gautamji, let's go to another very, very interesting thing you mentioned in the book. You write, and I quote, Savarkar's contributions were revolutionary and thought-provoking. As you know, and I know, and maybe our audience knows too, criticizing Savarkar is quite common in India these days. You do not take that path. Instead, you bring out all the revolutionary things he did or said, including calling the first war of independence for what it was, which is the first war of independence, and so on. Could you share with the audience your thoughts about Savarkar and his vision for India?
See, Vishal, no important political leader is 100% right or 100% wrong. Savarkar was deeply patriotic. He wanted freedom at all costs. He knew that the population of India is very religious. So he brought his political message across in religious terms. And he gave a very simple definition of Hindutva. Simply a feeling Hindu, that's it. And to make it more specific, he talked about Pitra Bhumi, Punya Bhumi, Karma Bhumi, etc. Now, Savarkar also should be looked at objectively and with the wisdom of the passing years. The RSS today has slightly moved from Savarkar's concept of Punya Bhumi. Savarkar intent is, if you take Savarkar's thing and take it to the logical conclusion, then one would feel that there is no place for a non-Hindu in Bharat. Now, one of the things which he already did was he said the term Hindu is religion neutral. But I think that RSS today talks about Hindutva mostly in cultural terms. All of us know that the cultural aspect and the religious aspect have some overlap, but it's now never 100% overlap. I think let me quote, there's a very interesting thing here, which is written by an Israeli commentator. Yoram Hazony is his name. I don't know if you've heard about him. He says, majorities should have the right to define the contours of a nation, cultural and political reality. Majorities should have the right to define the contours of a nation's cultural and political reality. And I think what the RSS is asking today is only for cultural primacy. And we all know, and which I have mentioned in the book, which many people have asked me about, Rashtra and Rajya should be clearly differentiated because they don't mean the same thing. Right from the beginning, Sangh has asked for the Hindu Rashtra. Hindu Rajya is a theocracy which nobody wants. And the idea of theocracy is contradictory to Sanatan Dharma itself. I mean, right from the very beginning, if you take Varna, the moment you separate Brahmins and Kshatriyas, that means you are putting the idea of theocracy aside. Nobody wants Hindu theocracy in this. It will not sustain also. Apart from the, ideologically and practically we can't have it. But what we want is the Hindu Rashtra. And actually, Sangh argues that India was always a Hindu Rashtra. It is just that we are saying it now, and post 2014, I think people are able to more confidently say all these things, because till 2014, all these were bad words. I think many people feel this way, which is why BJP is getting elected with ever increasing majorities. And I've been careful enough to write in the book that these majorities should be taken very seriously by the BJP. Because these majorities are being given because most of the people in the country think in a particular way now, and they are all thinking in roughly the same way. So I think when you talk about Savarkar, which was your original question, I think he had a very huge and profound influence on the Sangh, and then indirectly the party, and then now through the electoral mandate. So there is a direct causative chain which you can see from Savarkar. See, the rest of the thing have been cooked up about the Hindu Mahasabha and Gandhi's death and his petitions that he wrote to the British and etc., etc., etc. But take all this out. I mean, equal number of things could be written about some of our other prominent leaders. I mean, so that is part and parcel of political life itself, and political parties will indulge in all these things because their business is to get votes. In the end, their business is to get votes. If a political party tells you that it doesn't want votes, then it's bluffing. There are no moral victories in politics. Okay.
So, Gautam ji, my next question is about something you mentioned related to the difference between democracy and republic. You say in the book, and I find this very interesting, for the benefit of the audience, I'll say this. I found your book to be extremely informative and learning for me. I thought I knew a lot. Your book made me realize how little I know. So you talk about the difference between, yes, thank you very much. The difference between democracy and republic. And you said most people in India don't understand the difference between these two things. Could you explain to folks in easy language, layman's language, what is the difference between democracy and republic?
Very easy language. Democracy means what it says, demos means people, kratos means rule in Greek. So democracy is rule by the people. Okay. So everybody is equal, and usually democracy means there is a vote of some kind. And
in the book, you talk about different types of democracies in the world, which is a very interesting thing.
Ancient Greece, ancient India, so many places. Now, a republic is altogether different. Republic, in a strict sense of the term, means rule by an oligarchy. Okay, it's ruled by a group of people, not ruled by the people. Now is where the confusion starts. When the people in a democratic manner freely elect this oligarchy, as what happens in India, as what happens in America, Britain, and so many other liberal democracies, we vote for Lok Sabha members and assembly members. So the people are freely voting for their oligarchy to rule them. Because they are voting freely, it is a democracy. Because it is an oligarchy that is ruling, it is a republic. Please remember that republic just means ruled by an oligarchy. The oligarchy can take power by non-democratic means. It can simply seize power, like what happens in China. So China is a republic but not a democracy. It's called People's Republic of China. Okay.
And is the inverse also possible? Democracy but no republic? Do you have an example for that?
Yes, ancient Greece, ancient India. You know, in ancient Greece, the democracy was so highly developed that there were no judges in the courts. The people who were filing suits against each other had to simply speak in front of a jury, and the jury was going to decide everything. So, yes, ancient Greece, I think, is one of the purest examples of a democracy without a republic. That's why I talk about a democracy, Athens and Sparta.
So
Because Sparta was a pure republic. And put it in another way, if you want democracy, excuse me, democracy means the state exists for the people. In a republic, the people exist for the state.
So for the benefit of people who will be listening to this video on YouTube in the future, democracy and republic examples are US, India, got it. Countries that are republic but not democratic are countries like China, got it.
For example, the old USSR, Union of Soviet Socialist Republics.
Correct. So
it was not a democracy. They never called themselves a democracy.
Correct. And what is there any contemporary example of a country that is a democracy but not a republic?
It would have to be, I don't know, but it would have to be very, very small. Maybe I'm not very sure about Bhutan. Bhutan is a monarchy.
Right.
Would have to be very, very small if it's going to be a pure democracy without being a republic. Because people make republics out of pure convenience. You know, you can't have 1.4 billion people, you know, all of us ruling 1.4 billion people. There's a procedural problem there.
Correct. So, next question. In the book, you write that the readers, I find this very interesting. In a book that has so many interesting ideas, you say that the readers should judge the book on one idea. And that idea, you say, is 75 states of roughly equal population. And that is the model to govern India, you argue. Please explain.
Okay. Well, the answer may be a little longer than my previous answers. I say that every country that is aspiring to world power greatness, and which I think India is aspiring today, needs to emphasize its strongest point. Our strongest point is our diversity. Because it is this diversity, for pragmatic reasons, it is only our diversity that is not understood by other countries. I have met and talked and interacted with foreigners for 50 years now, more than 50 years. And this is the one thing about India that surprises all of them. Because countries with far, far less diversity than us have not been able to hold together as countries. Take Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, etc. Pakistan also, East and West could not stay for more than 24 years. So why is this diversity such a strength for us? It is because of Sanatana Dharma. That is the common canopy, which actually actively encourages diversity. And any system where there are 6 darshanas, it recognizes and freely admits that there are different ways of looking at the same thing. So I say, let us take this diversity and let us find the true measures of diversity. And these true measures I have identified as historical, geographical, and also a means of decolonizing ourselves psychologically. When people feel a true sense of their identity in small units, and the 75 states are given with justification. This business of states reorganization also needs to be looked at by serious readers. 28 states, I believe, is still too small. Gandhi wanted 750, which I believe is too large. So I have, yes, because it's going to your democracy thing, you know. When you go to 750 states, you are getting closer and closer to a pure democracy. So that is not practicable in today's world, because we have to interact with the rest of the world. We can't, if you have 750 states, the center becomes too weak. So 75, I have felt, is a very good via media, where the states will become economically strong and the center will become politically strong. One of the big deficiencies in our governance systems today is that states like Bengal, Tamil Nadu, Maharashtra have become too powerful politically. And they are way too powerful for the center. The center cannot tolerate such powerful states, politically powerful states. So political power, I do believe, should rest exclusively with the center. And in exchange, in a true federalism, it should be prepared to give economic power to the states. Because if you have small states of 2 crore population each and fine-tune them so that each becomes an economic powerhouse for 1 or 2 particular niche items. I have quoted in many places lavender and rose oil in Kashmir, solar energy in Kutch, textiles in Congo. So then you will get 75 economic powerhouses which can take on, because the states have to do what the states have to do. They have to provide employment, they have to give good health, they have to have a good police. These are not central subjects at all. So the center also has been very niggardly in terms of the financial independence that the states have. States, for a start, should be able to freely trade with each other without the center coming in for everything. Yes, there can be an overall GST, which is some kind of a give and take between the center and the states. But beyond a point, the center does not need to be financially powerful. It will have a control over the currency and the overall fiscal policies of the country, but it doesn't have to get into the business of employment and all these things which it is doing now. So I think this combination of 75 states of 2 crore, administratively convenient, historically relevant, geographically valid, and finally, ideologically, it is the best way in which we can shed the old colonial mentality. A best example of this is Kerala, where till recently 3 religious communities were living quite peacefully with each other, and they are roughly of the same population, about 2 crores each. So I have just taken a neat solution and said, take a Hindu majority Travancore, a Christian majority Kochi, and a Muslim majority Malabar. And it's already there. It's mostly there. I'm just formalizing what is there right now. And each of them, the little states, will start having a real pride in who they are. And this commonly held feeling that if you have more states, the center becomes weak, the country will disintegrate. It cannot disintegrate. This whole thing has been going on for 5,000 years without anything disintegrating. These are all mere political idioms of the day. And this is another thing that Congress people have tried to tell all of us, that there was no India before 1947. The Constitution is a holy book of God, and the Supreme Court, and so on and so on and so on. So I think all these, what you may call shibboleths, have to be now systematically taken down one by one. And I think This is what seems to be happening. So people are doing it. If political parties will not do this, they will only see what people want and then they will try to follow as best as they can.
So, Gautamji, I'm now going to shift a little from the book to you.
Oh,
I think it is very useful for us as readers and listeners to also learn about you. How did you get to be who you are? I know we know you as the writer behind the book, but how did you become who you are? When I first told people that I was going to interview you, their reaction, because they didn't know anything about you, was, oh, he must have been born in luxury and grew up in luxury and, been one of those political descendants. And I said, he's also a famous scientist. And then, of course, they didn't have any response. So tell us something about your life growing up. What was the influence of your famous grandfather on your life, your upbringing? Were you growing up in luxury? Were you a typical middle-class family? Were you a highly political family? Give us some glimpse into your growing up years.
Well, I got into a friendly scrap with one of my colleagues in the institute when I called myself as having a middle class upbringing. And then he says, oh, my definition of middle class has to change. But no, quite apart from my famous grandfather, whom I don't really wish to speak about too much, mostly for the reason that he wouldn't have liked it himself. Let me say that writing a book or being in academics, there's a certain, combination of nature and nurture. And when I say something is middle class, I mean that a great premium is given on morality and what is right and what is wrong is emphasized from an early age, and that one shouldn't do wrong things. As it turns out, my father was an employee of the central government. So we lived a kind of a typical life that we lived in government accommodations.
Was he like a regular employee, no privilege, like a regular normal employee?
Yeah, he was an officer in the Indian Audits and Account Service. So you know what that means, transfers here and there, and living in government accommodations. And 30 years in Hyderabad, I have lived in government accommodations. And there was no luxury, if that is what is meant, because even my famous grandfather, it was not, let me put it this way, Vishalji, it was never taken very seriously. Yes, he lived in a big house, grand house, and so on. But as a small example, which I have told many people after this book, I've talked a little bit more about him after the book than ever before. Whenever we would visit him in Delhi, he used to maintain an extremely old and practically non-functional car, and with a driver whom he used to pay from his own salary, which was only 1 rupee a month when he was president of India. So, and only that old, almost broken down car would be sent to pick us up in the station. No airport. So we would only be allowed to get into that personal vehicle that he had maintained. By that time, when he was president, that car was already 30 years old. We were not allowed to even look in the direction of those official cars and all that. And even the food served in the house and so on was cooked in the traditional way by a traditional cook whom he had employed for the previous 30 years. And we never went anywhere near any kind of official khana of any kind, any place. So it was a very austere sort of a thing. And so, and he also strictly never used to discuss political things. Never. I think there was a lot of confusion. I was 12 years old when Nehru died and we happened to be in Delhi at that time. So there was some gadbad in the house during those days because he was personally very busy, and so people were interested to see that he got his meals and so on time. But it was nothing more than that. So I would say that it was only later, I think, although I knew him very well. I was 20 when I last talked to him at length after he had stepped down from the office of president, and before I went to America for my studies. So I think I knew him fairly well. But it was only much later that I realized his greatness as an academic and so on. And after reading this book, especially some of the key speeches he has made in the assembly debates, I think that was, and at one point in time, I had a slight difference of opinion from what he said, and I've aired that too in the book because I felt that that's what he would have liked. And so I must say it was a positive influence, and I don't think that the fact that and so on, it was not a major factor. I think that I was an academic with a lot of discipline that comes from being in rigorous academics. That has helped me to write this book on the Constitution. And as you know, you are an academic yourself. You know that it's not so difficult for an academic to come out of that area and do research in some other area. You know that.
But Gautamji, I want to know a little bit more about your family, because I think that's an issue that many people will be curious about. Did you go to like top schools where the children of rich people go? When you were
Yes.
traveling in train,
Yes.
did the
Yes.
officials
No,
come to your compartment to serve on you and say,
no,
did your grandparents or parents call colleges for your admission? Like, tell us those things.
No. I went to a school where a top school in South Bombay, Cathedral, where children of very rich people went. But I must say that my parents really struggled hard to find the fees to send me and my brother to that school. It was not easy. I remember the monthly fees for that school was about 30 rupees a month in 1962. Whereas similar good schools in South Bombay, the fees were about 3 rupees, 4 rupees a month. So to spend 30 rupees a month on a school fees was, I think, a major sacrifice. And I think school admissions were not the things they used to be. Even my college admission. I mean, I just took my school leaving certificate and went to Xavier's, which was the top college in South Bombay at that time where we lived. And they just said, fine, you pay your fees, that's all. So it was not the kind of deal that one makes of it today. And sometimes one weeps for those days. But no, on the whole, there was, in fact, I think it was emphasized to all of us that, I tell you, I was almost 10, 15 years in the University of Hyderabad. None of my colleagues really knew who my ancestor was. And I didn't tell anybody, and nobody seemed to know, and even after they knew, I don't think anybody cared. So I like it like that. So.
And did your father used to boss around, people, the local?
Why? No. Now you're asking personal questions, but anyway, since you asked, but no.
I think
it was not done. It was not done in those days. Nothing of this sort. You see, people throwing their weight around and doing this is more a modern phenomenon.
I'm sorry if my question, you didn't like, but the reason is because, people see a politician's descendant and they think, they have a certain image today. And
yeah,
but
I'm not in politics even. I mean, nobody even knows who I am outside my subject. I think, okay, so people don't even, I mean, nobody in our family and all actually got into politics. It's a pretty large family, many cousins and then their children and all. No, nobody's into politics.
So you would say that your primary identity is as an academic. Would that be correct?
Absolutely.
So I also want to invite questions from the audience at this time. So if you have any questions, please raise your hand and we would welcome you to ask questions. But let me get back to as we wait for people to ask questions, let me get back to another question. We know that writing is difficult. You stay on track, you have to keep yourself motivated, there's too many distractions. It's easy to, especially because many academics like us tend to be curious. So you can spend the whole day reading and without writing any word, or a whole week reading. How did you keep yourself on track to actually writing the book?
Well, I don't know. I've written 3 scientific books before this. And my modus operandi has been pretty much the same. That the reading and referencing and things usually happen first. So starting around the beginning of 2021, when it was clear that the lockdown was not going to go away anytime soon, I started the vague ideas of that I should put something up. I still didn't get the idea of a book. But as you know, in academic life, when some idea starts interesting you, you start making notes and you read more. So for about 6 months, that's what I did. And I also started talking to a couple of people, not many. And I started making notes and writing things down, just reading whatever I could. And by about July, I decided that why don't I try to write a book? And some of the motivations for this I have mentioned in the preface of my book. I talked to the members of my immediate family, and my wife advised me to be cautious before I start writing, because she said, this is not your area of expertise, it's not your domain expertise. My sons were enthusiastic. They said, if you feel strongly about something, we know that you will not keep quiet. So if you feel like writing, write. So they said something slightly different. And basically, these are the only 3 people I consulted. And then in about August, I started writing. And I was done by the middle of November. And so that was, I write very fast. Once I decide to start writing, whether it's a paper or a book, especially a book, I don't usually do anything else. So I didn't do any other kind of academic work in that period, except to write this book. And chapter 4 especially, which is I believe, the core of the book, the 75 states thing. It's a nice coincidence, but I started on the first day of Navaratri and finished on the Dashami. So that was, chapter 4 was written very quickly and almost without going back and forth and stuff like that. So I believe chapter 4 is really like, it's the heart of the book, because it's there where I present the solution to our problems. Chapters 1, 2, 3 sort of define the problem, define it, and try to analyze where and how we went wrong and so on and so on. But at that point of time, the reader wants something more. Okay, you've said all these things. Many people have said all this. We also believe, but what is the new thing that you're going to offer in all this? Otherwise, it will be just one more example of quantification. Chapter 4, I think, gives something for others to criticize, which is, I think, the most important thing, because today there's also an overload of books, overload of things to read. Where do you read? Where do you start? Where do you stop? So I think if, since I've given something that people can contradict and refute, then this book would have achieved its purpose.
Gautamji, as you were writing, were there also any challenges you faced or anything that didn't go according to plan, or was it all smooth and quick?
I'm beginning to think now. No, not really. And unlike some of my other books, since you are asking, it's a matter of curiosity. I wrote the chapters in the order in which they occur in the book. Some of my scientific books I have not written like that. I have things that come very late in the book, I have written first, etc. And usually in my scientific books, almost always, there are 3 of them, I wrote the introductory chapter last. Whereas here I wrote it first. So I think that might convey something about the difference in the thought process. Yeah, I think.
Gautamji, we have a question from Sarita Sheshagri, so I'm going to ask her her question on camera. Sarita ji, would you mind asking your question directly?
Please.
Yeah, sure. Am I audible?
Yes.
Definitely, definitely.
Right. So thank you so much for this wonderful talk. My question actually comes from what I'm seeing around me, and all of us are seeing around us these days. So they say that the root of present-day wokeism can be traced to social justice theories. And as I've heard from the talk today, and also different articles on regarding the Constitution of India, social justice itself, especially in the context of caste-based reservations, does find its presence in the Constitution very clearly. Now, how much of what we see today in India as wokeism can be actually attributed to our Constitution? What are your thoughts?
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, you see, the way this CRT, critical race theory, has been adapted neatly to caste in India almost answers your question. So it has become part of an ideology. And yes, you are right, it is there in the Constitution. It started in 1931 with the Pune Pact made by Gandhi and Ambedkar, where both surrendered a little and both gained a little. So that from that point onwards, the role of the scheduled caste, scheduled tribes in any constitutional mapping of India was a given. And I don't find that much wrong with that, because I do believe that the scheduled caste, scheduled tribes people, it is a genuine discrimination. And I also believe the fact that which many scheduled caste, scheduled tribe people say, that despite all the reservations, despite the fact that some of them hold high positions, the social ostracism still continues. And I think that this is still a reality, and this is something. And they argue that on the second one, I don't know whether I agree so much or not. They say because of this, reservations must still continue for SC/STs. I think where the Constitution went wrong was with the other lower castes who are still within Chaturvarna. So, and Ambedkar argues correctly that unless class was defined as being equal to caste, which is what the South Indian members insisted on, because they said that they have something called backward classes, not castes, mind you. Backward classes were given reservation in Mysore since 1890 and in Tamil Nadu since the Justice Party, that is 1921 or so. And basically those rules were very clear. They said Brahmins and the rest. So anybody who was not a Brahmin basically was defined officially as a backward class. And this is the genesis of this whole OBC movement. Don't forget that long before OBC, VP Singh and all that, this was established fact in Tamil Nadu. And the whole Dravidian movement is part of their political ideology. So in order to, Ambedkar said, if we don't define it like this, backward classes will not find a representation. But where I think people have conveniently kept quiet is that I think at the time of the debates, it was genuinely felt that these backward classes of South India would be covered in this overall reservation of 22.5%. The supernumerary 27% of VP Singh and Devilal, I think that is a travesty. And after that, you see, it's like, that story about the lady who got on the tiger and couldn't get off. Now, no political party can afford to go back on OBC reservations. And in fact, it is the secret of the BJP electoral success in North India. So the representation of OBCs as such is now an electoral reality. So it's not something that any political party will want to come off so easily. So what we are really going to do with this huge hydra of a problem, I do not know, because it affects the education sector. And if we are going to, because then you get into political kind of discussion that am I saying that if you are from an OBC, then you are not so clever and so on. This is also not true. I mean, nobody says that. But then where does merit lie in all this? Does this economically weaker sections, reservation 10%? Today, there is some talk that Pasmanda community in Muslims are going to get reservation. So where does it all stop? I don't think it's, and yes, you are right. I think it has now been weaponized, this whole thing. And in the end, I don't think it even matters. I mean, 2% or 3% or 5% of Brahmins, they're probably going to be thrown under the bus in this whole thing. And I don't think anybody will much care also. I think we've gone too far. Yeah? I mean, I may not be offering, in the book, I do say that there should be sunset clauses on all these reservations. But another hopeful way of looking at it is, let's look at it from an economic point. Once we become, say, a $10 trillion economy, then caste is not going to matter. It's not going to matter for anyone, anywhere, anyhow. So at that point in time, probably these things will just get automatically dismantled. I think this is part of the process, the churn that is going on in Indian politics now, as we are gradually coming into a slightly higher economy. Today we are 3 trillion. So I think by 5, 6, 7 trillion, we are going to definitely see a difference in outlook. Caste is not, already in Uttar Pradesh, caste is not winning elections. You know, it is the crucible of caste politics in India, Uttar Pradesh and Bihar. And not yet in Bihar, but in UP, certainly good developmental things seem to be getting the votes. Although there are some caste calculations. But I don't think it is. And for example, Tamil Nadu politics is now in a churn. So we'll have to see really, these are the big experimental laboratories for all these caste experiments. So we'll have to look at Tamil Nadu, we have to look at UP, Bihar, to see which way the wind is blowing. I think it is still in a state of flux.
Gautamji, in the interest of time, we need to move towards the end of this talk to keep us to sort of the 1 hour time period. So the next 3 questions I'm going to ask you are sort of short answer questions. As a writer, which are the senior writers who inspire you? Whose works do you read?
The overall any writer at all?
Yeah. Which senior writers?
Any writer or Indian writer?
Indian writers would be preferable, but any writers who you think are good.
Well, my favorite book is Tolstoy's War and Peace.
Okay.
At my wife's urging, I started reading and finished reading Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen, and I found that to be a wonderful book. Yeah.
Okay. So what books are you reading these days?
I am reading now a very good book, Nalin Mehta's The New BJP. I think it's a very good analysis of the way in which the BJP is structured and how it does its electoral calculations. It's a lovely book, yeah.
Would you recommend it to others?
Oh yeah, certainly. Certainly. It came out at about the same time as my book did.
Okay. And what is the next book you're working on? I know earlier we talked about the possibility of you writing a biography. As you were talking about Savarkar, it also dawned on me that perhaps we need a balanced biography of Savarkar.
Vikram Sampath has written what I believe is going to be a standard work for some time. But anyway, I'm thinking of writing something, but I think telling the title little in advance will be giving away too much. So let's say that there will be some things coming out.
on science, on politics, on India,
Even-
or your biography?
Even that would be telling too much. So we'll keep a little bit of a suspense. And maybe when the next book comes, maybe I'll come back to Vitasta and maybe you will interview me at that time.
So Gautamji, I'll finish with one last question. My grandfather was a freedom fighter, and almost everything I do, I tend to think, would he be proud of what I do today? As a professor, as a writer, as these interviews maybe. Do you think your grandfather would be proud of the book you wrote?
Well, he would talk to me in Telugu and he would say, not bad.
On that note, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you all so much. Yeah. Bye now.
I enjoyed very much talking to you, and I greatly appreciate your giving us this time. And I hope to meet you in person sometimes. Thank you very much.
Very soon, hopefully.